Welcome, Hokies fans, to this week's edition of the Tech Sideline podcast. On today's episode, we'll discuss all things Hokies basketball after the big win over Duke last night. At this time a year ago, the Hokies were 2-7 in conference play. We all know what happened after that. Can the Hokies go on a run and make it all happen again? We'll tell you our thoughts and much more right here. It's episode 281 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it gets going right now. We record on Tuesday, January 24th, 2023 from the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center right here in Blacksburg, Virginia. We welcome you in whether you are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube. If you are on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're there, and also turn on the post notification bell so that you don't miss any future TSL content. This edition of the Tech Sideline podcast is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference in your overall experience. First Bank and Trust Company is the bank that puts you first. Go ahead and visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. All right, Will's got some big news to break, but first we'll get our introductions out of the way. Across the way, Will Stewart, founder and general manager of Tech Sideline. To my right, lead analyst and columnist Chris Coleman. In the fourth chair today, Miss Katie Adams. And behind the scenes, producing as always, Nick Brown. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. Thanks so much for being with us today on the Tech Sideline podcast. Excited for a great show. Big win against Duke yesterday. Wrestling and women's basketball are also rolling as well. But first, Will has some big news for us.
Right. So I wouldn't say I'm breaking it, but the Hokie Way finally released the numbers for their December push for donations. If you haven't seen it, go back and look at it. I think it's TSL Podcast 278. We had Jim Petrine on, and he's from the Hokie Way, and he talked all about them. They're an NIL organization, and they had a fundraising push in December. They got their 501c3 nonprofit status in November, had a big fundraising push in December to try to raise money for Virginia Tech NIL and for projects involving charities. And they were very successful. They set out with the original goal of raising $200,000 and matching that with an additional $200,000 from an anonymous donor. They blew past that and wound up raising over $300,000 in donations, and $300,000 of that was matched by the donor, who went in another $100,000. And so they raised over $600,000 in the month of December, 2022. So we'll leave it at that, because anytime you get to talking about the Hokie Way, you can explain all sorts of stuff. Just Google them, watch the podcast, go to their website and learn more. But people have been wanting to know how successful they were, and the answer is they were very successful. Thank you very much.
Awesome. So thank you very much to everybody, like Will just said. Again, that's the Hokie Way. Virginia Tech picks up a big win over Duke last night. They did it with a 24.8 rebound performance from Grant Basile. The team shot 53% from beyond the arc, 16 and 15-point games from Sean Padula and Hunter Couture, respectively. Castle Coliseum was absolutely rocking. Big Monday in Blacksburg did not disappoint. What was your instant reactions to last night's game?
No surprise.
I was going to say the same thing. I'm not surprised.
Well, I mean, I think the last podcast we had, we talked about the upcoming schedule, and we talked about at Syracuse, at Virginia, at Clemson, and then you come back home against Duke, and I was like, what was everybody worried about Duke for? That's the biggest chance of a win in that group, because they're at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're at home against a bunch of freshmen. You have a great chance to win that game if Couture is back.
Yeah, and because they're a team full of freshmen, the thing they tend not to do very well is play defense. And you could see that early in the game. Tech came out, they got open looks, they made him, and then it's on like Donkey Kong, If they're not guarding you and you're making shots, anything can happen, and that's what happened. By the way, I forgot to mention Katie gets props for the scheduling of this podcast. We were texting Sunday about having a podcast on Monday, and I was just like, I just don't want to do it. I don't want to talk about more losses. And Katie's like, well, I thought we were going to do it Tuesday so we could talk about the Duke game. And I was like, yes.
I wanted to start it off on a high note, and like you guys, I figured that we had a good chance of winning that game.
Tech was favored.
Yeah.
The
Two and a
Tech
half
was favored by 2.5 points. They won by 3.
And they won by 3, so Tech covered.
Yes. What do they say? Good teams win, great teams cover. There we go.
That's 5 out of 6, right?
That's
in
5 out of
Castle
6.
Against Duke.
Yes.
Against Duke. So, I mean, that was another question later on, but might as well bring it up as Castle kind of turned into a house of horrors for Duke. They can't seem to win there.
I think when you take freshmen on the road, it's going to be harder to win. No, they have very talented teams every year, of course. Filipowski guy I would take in a heartbeat. Whew. But ultimately they are freshmen. And I don't see a Zion Williamson type freshman on that team, or even a Paolo type freshman on that team. They're a good team, but they're not a great team. And Tech is a good team. They're a good team when they have Hunter Couture. I know they lost the first 2 games when he came back, but that was against the number 10 team in the country on the road and the number 19 team in the country on the road. Good teams win at home. Virginia Tech won at home last night. They're a good team. They're behind the 8 ball because of the Couture injury, because he was out for a whole lot of winnable games. I don't know if they'll be able to make that up or not. But yes, Virginia Tech is a good team, and they're going to win most of their games at home.
So Kyle Filipowski.
Yep.
It's so weird because we sit here as Virginia Tech fans, and Chris and I were talking about this last night in the stands. We're like, I don't really know who any of those guys are except Jeremy Roach, and why bother to learn? None of them are going to be here next year.
Right.
So you kind of show up every year and you see what they got. And Filipowski, he gets that was
legit.
impressive. He was tough. He was skilled. I think one thing that was underappreciated about him was sometimes Tech's defensive rotations on the perimeter weren't that great, and Duke wound up with open shots. But a lot of that's got to do with Filipowski, too. He can catch the ball in the post, and he can either make a move on you and score, or he's also really good at passing out of the double team. And he doesn't just many times he doesn't just pass out of the double team. He throws that skip pass across the court to the guy who's open. So it's remarkable to watch him play and realize he's only a freshman. He's a really good basketball
player. Skill
player.
level for a guy his size is pretty incredible. He's also incredibly tough. You probably only noticed this if you were there, because he was wearing the white leggings. Both of his knees were bleeding last night from hitting the floor so much.
Yeah.
And you could see it because he was wearing white over them. You probably couldn't pick that up on television. But let's get back to talking about Virginia Tech. But Filipowski might be my favorit Duke player since Grant Hill. Not with a caveat, because I haven't liked very many Duke players since Grant Hill.
Well, when Mutz was on, he said Paolo Banchero is the best player he'd ever played against in college. And somebody on the board last night said they weren't so sure Filipowski isn't better than Banchero.
They're different players.
He's better at some things.
He's not. Right now, I looked up some mock drafts this morning. He is not a projected lottery pick. The mock draft, I looked at him early second round.
Really? Filipowski?
Yeah.
Interesting.
All right, enough of that. He's right.
Anyway.
He made a move last night that I was calling the game, and I said that was an NBA step. He made that Euro step.
Yeah.
And I said that was a move I don't think anybody else on the court right now could make besides him. So definitely a special talent. But to take it back to Virginia Tech, I'll ask this. Can this win spark that run that they need? 2-7 last year at this time. Can they do it again?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, like I said, I think they have a good team when they have Hunter Couture, and they would have a better team if they had Rodney Rice, but you can't really miss something that you never had, right? It's going to be more difficult this year because, in my opinion, the ACC is better this year than it was last year.
It is.
It's deeper. Obviously, there's one really bad team at the bottom in Louisville, and I don't think there's like a standout elite team in the conference, but I think it's overall, there's more quality teams, like solid teams. Like Clemson is good and solid, and NC State is good and solid, and Syracuse seems to have improved a bit. And Pitt, even though they lost to Florida State the other day, they've improved. So I think it's just the quality is deeper this year. So it's going to be more difficult as a result. And the problem is Tech lost winnable games.
That game against BC, that's on the road.
That was on the road. But yeah, the Clemson and NC State games, I mean, you win those with Couture, and you're sitting here with 4 ACC wins right now instead of 2.
You're 3 and 4. Am I adding
or 4 and 3, depending on what happens to the weight game.
4 and 5.
And then the weight game was close, obviously, without Couture. So there were plenty of opportunity, a lot of winnable games. So you worry that you're behind the 8 ball. So ACC record's the exact same as it was, but the Tech doesn't have to necessarily win as many games as they did last year to make the NCAA tournament. That all depends on what other teams do, how the bubble looks, and how many quad 1 wins you have. Right now, Tech has 2 quad 1 wins. Last year at this time, they had 0.
Right.
Now, they also have wins over number 31 Duke and number 32 North Carolina. If those teams get into the top 30, then that's 4 quad 1 wins.
And you're 4-4 instead of 2-4.
Right. So, but you could also see Oklahoma State and Penn State drop out. So there's some fluidity there. Point being, Virginia Tech, from a numerical standpoint, from a metric standpoint, they're in much better shape right now than they were a year ago at this time. You know, Lunardi does his little bracketology thing every day and posts it on Twitter. And he does his last 4 out, last 4 in, also considered. Even throughout the entirety of Virginia Tech's losing streak, he has had them in the also considered line because their computer numbers are very good for a team with their record. And they have quad 1 wins.
They weren't out of that last 4 in, last 4 out. They weren't out of that until they lost to UVA,
right?
Which was very recently.
Yeah.
Right.
So looking at the rest of the schedule, you got 11 regular season games. They're 2-7. You got to go 8-3 to get to 10-10. You know, and
right.
And some of those games are pretty stout. Like they've got Syracuse this weekend, then they have to go to Miami. Mm-hmm. And Miami is one of those teams that this sounds kind of silly, but when they're playing at their best, they're really hard to beat. Most teams are, you know, but Miami in particular, I fear them if they decide to show up and play well. They're very talented. So, you know, you've got a home game against Virginia. I like Tech's chances there. At Duke is down the road. You know, 8-3 is not out of the question, but it is going to be tough.
It'll be out of the question if you don't beat Syracuse on Saturday. There's just like you can't help but look ahead, but at the same time, like let's string some wins together first, and then start really getting into it.
Yeah, that's a massive game coming up. One thing that you know, you hate to like break any news or throw someone under the bus, but I sit next to Sean Padula in class. Every class, he's doing class. That's, you know, you go to class, that's what you're doing. And today, I don't know what Mike Young said. I don't know what. When he came home and I was in class with him the next morning after Virginia, this did not happen after a trip to Charlottesville. I look over, entire class, Sean's watching film. That's what he was doing. I don't know what that means. I'm just saying, after a loss to Virginia, he wasn't watching film, and now after they beat Duke, he's watching film. Maybe they're a little extra bought in. Who knows what that means? But, you know, take that for whatever it's worth. What went right last night for Virginia Tech?
Offensively, they were very good, I thought. Ball movement was good, inside-out game. They changed the lineup, and that was a lot to do with matchups, I think. But I think when you look at how Maddox is playing recently, he had a really good game against UVA, but generally speaking, you know, Clemson, 20 minutes, 0 of 6 from the field, no points. You don't know what you're getting from a week-to-week basis. It's generally not good, though, from a shooting standpoint.
It has not been good.
And he's one of those guys who he's got one big strength as a basketball player, and that's his shooting. If it's not working for him, he doesn't do anything else well enough to justify playing him major minutes. He's like a one-tool baseball player. Like, you can make it in the majors if you have no power and you're not a great defender if you hit 300 and you get on base a lot. Mm-hmm. The second your bat speed slows down and you become a 220 hitter, you're
what
not.
What else is there?
You're right. Right. There's nothing. There's not much to fall back on there, and you get sent back to the minors.
And our guy, let me jump in here and say, our guy GC Hokie 34 on the message boards used to be a college assistant coach. He summed up. Maddox has an unconventional form, and I thought he summed it up in a very interesting way. He said his shot has a lot of moving parts to it, and if one of those parts gets off, it throws the whole shot off. So I think that's kind of what's happened to him here. Last year, I sat here on the podcast when he was shooting so well, and I said, man, I got a problem. Every time he shoots, I expect it to go in. And that's not true this year. You know, so I think that's part of what's something's just not quite right there.
Right. So I'm not saying he can't get it back, because he certainly can, but right now he doesn't have it.
Yeah.
And how long can you go on if you're Mike Young? you eventually expect him to shoot his way out of it, right? And you thought maybe he had it at UVA. And then the very next game against Clemson, he doesn't score and goes 0 for 6. So, yeah, you make the change from a matchup perspective against Duke, and it works. MJ Collins had an efficient game for the third game in a row. So now you've got 5 efficient players on the court instead of 4. So you're a better basketball team. Now, conventional wisdom says Syracuse coming up, you put Maddox back in because he'll get some open looks against the zone, right? Not the way Syracuse played Virginia Tech in the last meeting. Last meeting, they just gave Tech the lane, and they let Mutz and Basili and Kidd do whatever they wanted.
Was that the game
lane.
where the 3 of them went 25 of 37?
Yes.
And the outside guys were 4 of 30?
Something like that. Yes.
That night, Tech shot 3 of 19.
They did not help off the 3-point shooters into the lane.
Yeah.
So Maddox only took 3 shots that night, only 1 3-pointer. Like, we don't even know if he's going to get any looks from the outside against Syracuse. So it'll be interesting to see how Mike Young plays that. But you try to play the percentages, I think, as a coach. And right now, like, the percentages for Maddox, they're just not in his favor in terms of being on the court a whole lot. So we'll see what the lineup looks like. I don't know if that's going to be a continuous thing or if that was a one-time thing, but I think it made Virginia Tech a more efficient basketball team.
So one of the stats that Damian Salas includes in his live stats, I don't think it's archived anywhere. So to see it, you have to look at live stats. He does a plus-minus for each player. How many points did your team win by while you were on the floor or lose by while you were on the floor? And it's a 1-game snapshot, and I'll give you a line here in a second that'll make you go, oh, really? But last night, Collins played 22 minutes and Tech was plus 10 when he was on the floor. Maddox, he was in 6 minutes, registered a 0. Justin Mutz, interestingly enough, was a -5 for the game. But the one that makes you raise an eyebrow, and it kind of points out that this is a kind of a not really something that really means anything, so to speak, is Basili was a -2 while he was on the floor. Tech actually trailed
that's why I've never been a believer in the plus-minus stats.
I like talking about it, but don't take it too seriously.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things where, like, you telling me if you take Grant Basili off the court last night, Virginia Tech's a better team.
Right. So Collins is a plus 10. Well, maybe when he was in there, Duke just missed a bunch of open shots,
right.
Which really has nothing to do with him, So kind of take that with a grain of salt, but it's always fun to look at.
No doubt about that. Total minutes for Darius Maddox, like we just said, 6 total minutes. It seems like Padula was kind of back to his normal self last night after a couple of strugglesome games.
Much better as far as just letting the game come to him. He forced a couple layups early in the second half, but for the most part, he just let the game come to him. I mean, he did take a couple of deep threes, but the main difference is like he was set. He was square to the basket, faced up to the basket, and he wasn't doing that earlier in the season. So yeah, I thought it was a much more efficient game on his part. I think he's been a little bit more efficient ever since Couture came back, which you could expect.
Yeah, he was 4 of 8 from the field overall and 3 of 5 from 3-point range.
So he didn't shoot it 20 times like he was doing in some of those games when Couture was out,
right.
Which is a sign that he was playing within the offense.
And he played 39 minutes and only turned it over twice.
How many minutes did Couture play?
Couture played full 40. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. That's impressive.
And that elbow's bugging him.
Oh, you can. Sometimes he grabs at it.
Yeah.
Well, you couldn't really tell it on TV, but you can see it in person where the fracture was. It was like on the outside of the elbow. That's where that big heavy pad is.
Yeah.
And we thought it was a sprain, but then Couture did the interview last week where he said, "Yeah, we thought it was a sprain at first, but it was fractured."
Oof.
Wow.
So
he's still trying to heal.
Yeah.
And that's tough.
No doubt about that. How about MJ Collins? We talked about him a little bit. Let's talk about him a little bit more. The freshman seems to have been stepping up big the last couple of games. He talked about in some press conferences how he feels a lot more confident on the floor. He's starting to find his shot a little bit. I think it's evident.
Well, he's starting to make his shots. He went through a long stretch there where he was getting a lot of open jumpers and just wasn't making them. Over the I put these numbers in an article today, and I'm trying to remember.
I was going to say I'm going to pull the article up. Do you remember the numbers off the top of your head?
Some of them. He averages 3.7 points per game for the season. Over the last 3 games, he averages 6.7 points. His 3-point shooting for the season is 27%. The last 3 games, he's 5 of 7. I think 35% field goal for the season. The last 3 games, 58%. I don't expect him to keep shooting 71% from 3-point range, but he's showing signs of becoming a more efficient player. And that's, when Couture was out, Tech hasn't had a good, consistent third guard all season. So when Couture went out, they didn't have a good, consistent second guard, much less a third guard. So now Couture is back, and if Collins or Maddox, because Maddox did it against UVA, if Collins can play at a more consistent level than he has, then I think that could be a big boost to Tech. He's had to play more minutes than he was ready for, which is unfair to him. It's Eric Green had to play more minutes as a freshman than he was ready for. And he averaged 2.3 points per game and shot, it's in the article somewhere, shot 29% from the field, I think.
Yeah, he was 29 and 99 from the field, 29%. Eric Green. And he was 30% from 3-point range.
Right. I didn't think he was an ACC player after that.
And then led the nation in scoring 3 years later.
Led the nation in scoring, All-American, first team All-ACC, ACC Player of the Year, drafted, still plays overseas, played in the NBA some, looked like a horrible player as a freshman. MJ Collins has never...
He's
never struck me as like, oh, he's not an ACC caliber player. I didn't think Eric Green was an ACC caliber player after the first year. I'm not saying he's going to go on and be Eric Green, but like everybody develops at a different pace.
Yeah, so there's the numbers, and then there's the intangible stuff you see when you watch MJ Collins. So let's take a little bit of a tangent. Rank the guys on the team in terms of athleticism, and he's up near the top.
Absolutely.
He's 6'4", I think, so not real tall, but he's explosive, off the floor. He's got a nose for the ball, and
let's say he and Padula are like the most fluid athletes on the team.
MJ flies when he dunks that basketball, which is not an easy thing to do. Some guys look weird dunking, and he just flies.
Yeah. He's a legit athlete. And he's a good rebounder. He's a very good rebounding guard. So he's just got to continue to learn where to be in the offense. And I think he's naturally going to be a good defender because he plays hard and he's strong and he's athletic.
And he's strong. We left that out.
Yeah.
He's wiry, but he is strong.
He is strong. So all the physical traits are there, and I've heard nothing but good things about his work ethic and his attention to detail. So I think he's going to be a very good player. He's been forced into a bigger role than he should have at this stage in his development, but he's starting to show signs, and I'm high on his future.
David, was there any discussion last night? So Collins makes the go-ahead shot with 12 seconds left. Was there some discussion about who that play was for and how it developed that way?
He got the ball.
So he just kind of wound up with it. It wasn't necessarily... So if anything, I think it was probably designed for Couture to go down the middle, and he drew the defense and hit Collins in the corner.
One thing Duke did a good job of in the second half that they did not do in the first half is they were trying to take away that dribble handoff that they always do to Couture. And that's how Couture gets those threes. I think they were trying to, because it was a dribble handoff to Couture, and he had nowhere to go with it and got it to Collins.
Yeah.
Duke fans are sick and tired of Hunter Couture, I bet. Hopefully he uses his COVID year and they get this play against him one more year.
Tech was 7 of 10 from 3-point range in the first half, and then Duke extended that defense, got really physical around the 3-point line, and
3-9 in the second half.
Yeah, and it made things a lot harder out there on the perimeter.
Yeah.
So are we going to talk about Basile?
Yeah, I was waiting for it. So I wanted to say blackout uniform Grant Basile is officially like a thing because he did it against Dayton. Now he's doing it here. Grant Basile was a beast last night.
He was. What was it, 26 and 8?
26 and 10, I think. Was it 8?
No, he didn't have 10. It was 8.
8. I'm remembering Kitley, I think.
No, you're remembering his game against Syracuse.
Right, because I looked it up.
It was actually 24 and 8.
24 and 8, because I looked at, you're right, I looked up Syracuse. because people on the message boards were saying, "Oh, that's the toughest I've seen him look," and I'm like, "Did you watch the second half against Syracuse?
He quietly had over 20 points.
No. Here's the thing. Like, I do think people nitpick Basile too much.
Yeah.
I think if you're a really good player, you'll have people nitpick the weak parts of your game. Not everybody's. Like, if he did everything well, he'd already be in the NBA.
He wouldn't be
He's
in
like
college.
Any other college basketball player. He's got strengths and weaknesses. Yeah. It's about building a team that, the strengths fit together and everything like that. He's a good player. He's a net positive, and he's going to have games like that. I thought last night's game was the most effective he's been in the paint this season. Over 40, an entire 40 minutes worth of basketball, because he only made 1 3 last night. Everything else he did was in the paint.
And early in the season, it would be interesting at this point, for me personally anyway, to go back and watch one of the very early games. Because I remember sitting in Castle during the out-of-conference, particularly the first game they played, and the ball movement was so good, and he was hanging around the perimeter, making three-pointers. And I think, having observed him for, however many games this year, are they 20 games into the schedule? I think 20. Something like that, 12 and 8. I think part of it is starting to click for him. I think he's learning to get more physical inside. He's not a physical basketball player. He probably punched me for hearing me say this, but I don't see a guy who's physical by nature. He's a skilled player, and I think he's learning how to be more physical. You can see it. I thought I saw it in the second half against Syracuse, and I thought I saw it again last night. And if that's something he can keep building on as they get through the ACC schedule, that's important.
He had a couple of nice defensive plays, too. He had a block from behind that was pretty big.
He's kind of good with those sneaky blocks.
He is, yeah.
Those trailing blocks, I call them. Alumo is really good at that, and Basile's got that to him, too.
So I want to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this schedule here and actually kind of go game by game and not necessarily pick them, but we'll see what we're dealing with here. I mean, you start with Syracuse on Saturday. This is probably our one podcast of the week, so might as well get into a small little preview of what Virginia Tech has their hands full with. I mean, they lost by 10, but it was a 20-point game at one point. This is no cakewalk.
It was the only game where Couture was out that was not competitive.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Virginia Tech has issues keeping the ball out of the paint, whether that's throwing it into the paint or stopping the drive. Ironically, the only game where I feel like they've been good, really good at that the last couple weeks was the Clemson game. And that's the one game where they didn't score enough points to win. Right?
Missed a lot of open shots.
But they have to do a better job keeping the ball out of the paint. Syracuse is going to do what they do defensively. I expect they'll do the same thing they did last time and try to take away the three-point shot and just give Tech whatever in the paint. We'll see. It wasn't Tech that's offense that lost that game in the Carrier Dome, JPA, Wireless, whatever it's called, the House of Horrors. It was Virginia Tech's inability to keep the ball out of the paint, and that's what's got to be better in this upcoming game.
So, Gio, how is Syracuse trending right now? Because the last time we talked about them, they had won 9 of 11.
Yeah, they've won 10 of 12. Their one loss since the last time we talked, and I was going to try and not talk about Syracuse because I know people don't like when I do that.
We're playing them. So
they lost to Miami in a very, very close one at Miami. Cuse led the whole game. Miami went on a quick little run at the end, beat them by a possession. Then Syracuse just went on the road and beat up on Georgia Tech, and they got North Carolina tonight, 9 o'clock tip-off. That's a big one in the Dome. So that's huge. I mean, if both teams are coming off of a win against a blue blood,
as a Tech fan, I think you want UNC to win that to push it back into a Q1 win.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
You want UNC to win that?
UNC to beat Syracuse.
UNC needs to be top 30 for a Q1 win.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and they're 32nd.
Or do you want, because you play Cuse twice and you lost one to Cuse, do you want Cuse to win?
No. Okay. You do. We don't.
I will be rooting for Syracuse.
So anyway, that's a, you're 2-7. 3-7 sounds a lot better than 2-8, and that's a home game, and with Couture back, you got to see how that goes.
Yeah, and so that game is tonight.
That is tonight at 9 o'clock.
Generally in these situations, the home team does have the advantage. So Tech was home last night. They'll get one extra day of preparation. Where is the Syracuse North Carolina game?
It's in the Dome.
It's in the Dome.
Yep.
Okay. So
not the Dean Dome, the JMA Wireless Dome.
Okay. So you've got one extra day of prep time, and then Syracuse has to take a flight. So Virginia
And
Tech.
Syracuse doesn't do something like play a Wednesday game also.
Nope, they're each other's next game is
Okay.
is each other. Yes.
Yeah. So advantage Tech. It's at
yeah.
home. 1 extra day of preparation. Syracuse takes a flight. That's a game that you need to win.
So, by the way, a little celebration here. There's only one more RSN game left on the schedule.
Which one is it?
At Notre Dame.
Okay.
So ACC Network will be Syracuse and Tech, 7 o'clock. Then you got to go to Miami. I just was the Maddox shot.
Yes, I was at Miami.
That was at Miami.
Well, the
last year?
half court shot was here. We lost to
that's
him on a
right.
half court shot here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then going forward, you got Miami after that. Virginia. You have to beat Boston College.
Yes, you do.
You cannot
I won't be returning to this podcast ever again if we don't beat
I might not either, Katie.
It's that important, seriously.
Notre Dame. You got Georgia Tech's not good. You got to
They're
go
not
beat
good.
Georgia Tech.
At Notre Dame, at Georgia Tech, 2 relatively winnable road games.
Oh, certainly very winnable road game.
Team that you're almost nervous to play. I think it could be tough. It definitely bodes better for Tech that they get them at Castle. Pitt has been surprisingly a little better than I think people thought.
And then they go and lose to Florida State.
Yes.
Who has not been good.
Right. That's
But maybe
that's true.
Florida
that was on
State's getting
Saturday,
better.
right?
I think it was on Saturday, yeah.
Okay. And that was a home game too. That
Yeah,
was in
but
the Zoom.
you know, the thing basketball teaches us, and if last year didn't teach us this lesson, we should definitely know it by now, is that, like, teams change throughout the course of a season. Like, the Virginia Tech or the Pitt or the Florida State or the UNC or whoever, the November versions of those teams, it's not necessarily going to be the same in January. And then the January version isn't necessarily going to be the same in March. I mean, that wasn't the case for Virginia Tech last year, not even for UNC. UNC was a bubble team just like Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
They didn't have a Power 5 win until they won in Castle, or excuse me, a Quad 1 win until they won in Castle last year. They were a 9 seed in the NCAA tournament, and then they played for the national title.
Yeah. I mean, the season's almost the regular season's almost 5 months long.
Right.
That's a really long time.
Yeah, it's not like football season that's 3 months. Like it is a long, drawn-out season, and so many different things can happen.
Football, the thing you pay most attention to is the injuries that happen during the year. And that's a big factor in basketball, but there are other things that enter into it, just like confidence.
Right.
You know, if we'll see if last night's some sort of springboard. One more comment I wanted to make about last night. It was fun. It's always fun to beat Duke, but beyond Filipowski, I just wasn't super impressed.
Right.
Sorry to say that. You know, there are a lot of 4- and 5-star recruits on that team, but nobody scared me more than Filipowski did. And then it's not as much fun without Coach K there on the sidelines. You know, I mean, I know we all like to rag on John Shire too, but it's just kind of different.
Right. And actually, Duke's most highly touted recruit doesn't even really play much. He was kind of a disappointment.
backup, yeah.
Yep. So Filipowski was the 7th best guy. Their other guy was number 1. I'm trying to look. I believe it was Lively. Yep.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember if it was Likely or Lively.
Yeah, he looks the part. He threw down a big donk last night, but that was pretty much it.
Yeah. I mean, and he's taller too. He's 7'1". So if Will mentioned the number 8 and 3. What exactly does Tech have to do to not have to really worry about the ACC tournament? To not put the pressure on of having to win it?
Everything.
Really?
We won
Have to
all
win
of
it
them,
all.
basically. I mean, I wouldn't say that. Maybe 9-2 with something. I mean, so much of it, though, like, depends on what other teams do. The bubble changes every year because the resumes change every year. Like, the selection committee isn't out to get anybody like fans think. It's just there are different resumes every year. Like, you can't set specific requirements to make the NCAA tournament because what if not enough teams make those specific requirements every year and you don't have 68 teams in the tournament,
And
right?
how many bids are going to get stolen in the one league conference tournaments?
Right.
If
So
all the
just-
favorites win, then that's more at large bids. For other schools.
So, like
we stole a bid last year.
right. And so you just don't know yet. The numbers, the computer numbers are good. So if Tech wins enough games,
Tech's 50th in the net.
right.
I think you got to get to at least 40. So pay attention to the
It's
net.
not the net ranking itself.
It's the Q1 wins.
It's how many. Yes, the net ranking exists to determine quality wins, not necessarily your own ranking.
Okay, that's fair.
Now, don't get me wrong. You can't be 89th in the net and make the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
But like, if you're good enough, if you're top 60 or so in the net and you have enough Q1 wins, enough overall wins, your own net ranking isn't going to keep you out of the tournament, I don't think. Virginia Tech is going to be fine in all the computer rankings. It's just a matter of, will they end up with enough overall wins to make the NCAA tournament? What is enough? That depends on how many of them are Q1 wins and what other teams' resumes are. Let's see, what do they have? 12 wins right now. I mean, if they went 9-2 down the stretch, I'd feel great about it.
Yeah.
But considering even if they do, if they go 8-3, I would feel good about that too, because I think they'll have enough quality wins in there.
Yeah, of course, it depends upon where the wins are. I think if you go, if you're on the wrong side of the bubble, I was trying to figure out how to phrase this. If you're on the wrong side of the bubble going into your conference tournament, I'm not sure what you do there makes a whole lot of difference. I've seen, and Chris, you can weigh in on this, I've seen a lot of instances where teams would do well in their conference tournaments, and Buzz Williams would argue this from last year. Oh, by the way, here's a tangent. While Virginia Tech was on their losing streak, Texas A&M was winning every game.
This is another, God, Tech fans.
Now, wait a minute. Last night, Tech beats Duke, and Texas A&M finally loses an SEC game. So what's going on here?
Tech fans have latched on to Buzz Williams for some reason. And every little streak. So last year it was, you literally read our boards. And last year it was like, oh, Mike Young's so much better than Buzz, blah, blah, blah. And then this year there's a losing streak for Virginia Tech. And then A&M starts 5-0 in the SEC, and you see people saying, Buzz Williams is a better coach than Mike Young.
Yeah, we had a few of those pop
I'm
up.
like, I don't know why people, every year they fall into the
what has happened the last 2 weeks,
yes,
right?
of judging an entire career and an entire season or anything like that. I don't know why fans do that.
Anyway, I left a point. There have been times where if you were on the bubble and you did well in the conference tournament, it didn't seem to make any difference. So I would say that I would say that Tech needs to be on the correct side of the bubble going into the conference tournament.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Katie, what do you got in the fourth chair for us?
One comment about the Buzz Williams thing. I will say, though, there's that tournament we play in next year in November in Orlando, and Texas A&M is one of the teams in that pool. I am 100% going to that tournament in Orlando. I mean, my family just loves that area of the U.S., but
I've never been.
I'm just very excited for that matchup, and I'm sure that'll be a day to maybe stay offer on Twitter, or offer on the message boards, because it'll get a little bit crazy.
Potential matchup, but if ESPN's smart, it will happen.
It would be nice if Tech football had an off weekend whenever that happens in Orlando.
It'll be Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, unless we have an off week the week before UVA.
Right.
So no, we're not going to have an off
Bummer.
week.
Okay.
Well, this past year, like, we were playing in Charleston, and I'm like, I really want to go to Charleston, but we have a football game, and I should, make sure stay here. I can watch the Liberty game, then write my Sunday column, as opposed to if I was in Charleston, there's no way I'd get a Sunday column written, right? But at the same time, now that I think about it a month later, it doesn't really matter that I wrote whether my post-Liberty column came out on Sunday or Monday. Maybe I should go to that Orlando game. Unless, depends on who we play.
We'll discuss. We'll have a staff meeting and we'll discuss.
Yeah.
We could take the TSL van and hit
I was
the
going to
road.
say, can the interns come?
No. I'd be flying.
I've driven a conversion van to Orlando in one day. It's 711 miles.
That doesn't sound pleasant.
There's a big TV in the back. I'm in. We're doing it.
Well, first thing, Chris, how disappointed are you that you didn't get free bacon coupons last night? There's going to be a lot of chances for that again. Hopefully it comes to fruition.
Exactly how much is free bacon? I mean, how much bacon is like free?
I'm pretty sure
It's
you
a
get a
voucher
pack
for
of
a
bacon.
package. It's a voucher for a package.
A pound? Okay.
So a pound.
Oh, okay.
That's a lot of bacon.
That'll last me for a few days.
There were several opportunities last night where it almost happened. I think
like three.
Filipowski
Three
missed.
times. Yeah.
Like
Three
two
times.
times he went to the line.
Yep.
He missed the first shot, and then he drained the second one. Of
Now, I
course,
do have a
so.
food story.
Okay.
And this is, so I entitled my article today, Cheeseburgers in Paradise. And there's
Now,
a
wait a
reason for
minute.
that.
The song is In Paradise. Did you mean to say And Paradise?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Whatever.
Just checking.
I
double checked that before I posted.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
David, the editor, checked it.
Anyway, it can be entitled either one. I really don't care. That's not the point. The point being is, like, let's take a trip back in time to the ACC tournament last year. So I watched the Clemson game on my couch at home. It's a nail biter. I'm like, I can't take this anymore. I got to go out to watch the Notre Dame game the next night. I have to watch it amongst Tech fans. So I went to PK's to watch it, had a cheeseburger before the game. Tech won. Semifinals the next day.
I've heard this story.
I expected to watch. I expect to watch the game at PK, so I go to PK's again. And I'm like, probably have a cheeseburger again since we won last night. Didn't end up watching at PK's because my friends were at Champs, but I had my cheeseburger at PK's. Tech won. Go out for the finals against Duke the next night. I don't go to PK's, but I go to Champs instead. And I'm like, I got to keep the cheeseburger streak going. So I got a cheeseburger at Champs, and Tech won. So I got a little cheeseburger streak going for ACC games, right? First, and I had forgotten about it by the time this season rolled around. So the first ACC game that rolls around this year was the UNC game, and I didn't get a chance to eat before the game, so I was like, I'll grab food at Castle. So I walk around the concourse, and I settle on a cheeseburger. Tech won. And I still, at this point, I had forgotten about my previous ACC tournament streak. So then, 7 games in a row after UNC, Tech loses. And I'm sitting around yesterday afternoon, and for some reason it just popped in my
And
head.
a voice whispers in his ear, cheeseburger.
It was Mike Young's voice.
And I'm like, wow, we won 4 ACC games in a row when I ate a cheeseburger, and we've lost 7 in a row when I didn't. So I'm like, I got to Castle early last night. I got my cheeseburger, and Tech won. So Tech's last 12 games, they're 5-0 when I get a cheeseburger, 12 ACC games. And those are 2 wins over UNC, 2 wins over Duke, and a win over Notre Dame. All 5
good Notre Dame
all
team.
5 NCAA tournament teams. And not only that, Tech is averaging 79 points per game in those 5 games, as opposed to 66 points per game in the 7 games I didn't have a cheeseburger that they lost. So I'm starting a cheeseburger fund.
I'm going to
So
need
wait
you
a minute,
to...
we got 2 things here. You and I cannot go out together and watch a game. That's a
PKs.
guaranteed loser.
That's true.
Okay.
That's true.
At,
That's true.
At PK's.
Well, Champs too. We lost the NCAA tournament
we?
when we were at Champs.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. And you got to eat a cheeseburger.
Yes.
I'm going to need a strict cheeseburger diet out of you for the next 2 months.
Only before games.
Only before games.
I'm a very healthy eater.
I know a guy who eats a lot of
my spring
cheeseburgers.
cardio will be brutal after this basketball season is over. But
Katie,
you got to
what
do
else
what you got to do.
Yeah, well, we finally won a basketball game, so no rant from me about that this week, but a really great week in general for Virginia Tech athletics, especially inside Castle Coliseum. I know we're going to get to that in the second half, but we'll quickly mention the win against NC State in wrestling, women's basketball win over Wake Forest, and of course the win last night for men's basketball against Duke. All of those inside Castle Coliseum. Where do you think Castle solidifies itself within the ACC as an environment factor? Because there's 15 teams in the ACC for basketball, if you include Notre Dame. It's got to be top 5. It's probably higher up than that, I would say.
Most of the time when you read those anonymous player and coach interviews, they say it's second behind Cameron.
Yeah.
As far as like difficulty, noise level, because the seats are so close to the court.
Yep.
And it's a very intimate environment.
And they're so straight up and down.
Right. No,
speaking.
there's different types of difficulty. I'm still going to call it the Carrier Dome. The Carrier Dome is difficult not because there's a bunch of people right on top of you. It's because it's cavernous. So Rodney Rice, in the one and only game he's played in, goes 1 of 9 in the Carrier Dome. But it's like every shot Rodney Rice has attempted in practice in college has been in Castle or the Han Hurst Center, which are small and intimate. And now you've got these wide open spaces in the Carrier Dome. I imagine the Carrier Dome is difficult, generally because you're playing a quality team, but because your depth perception gets thrown off totally from playing in some of these smaller gyms. I'm guessing JPJ is probably a difficult place
it was
to play.
rocking the other night when I was there. It was one of the best atmospheres
I like the
I've
way
ever seen.
that's a big place, but it's constructed where it's very intimate. The way they pile the upper decks on top of the lower decks, it feels smaller than it really is. JPJ does.
Yeah.
It was loud. It was very, very loud.
Yeah.
So to compare apples and oranges, it reminds me of Radford University plays in the Dedman Center, and they have the court runs like this, and they have some stands at each end of the court, but it's wide open beyond that. So I have this half-remembered story of they hang black curtains to provide a backdrop for the shooters because it is in its own tiny little way. It's almost Carrier Dome like. It's got there's nothing back there.
So University Hall back in the day. Remember, it was circular.
Yeah.
And the stands were so far away from the crowd. I think as far as like traditional college basketball crowd, college basketball environment, and and you see some of these teams build these bigger arenas because they sell more tickets and they can get concerts there like Maryland and NC State. Except those teams, They haven't been as good since they opened those new arenas, and they moved out of their arenas that were really good home court advantage, like Reynolds Coliseum and Cole Fieldhouse.
I was going to say where Maryland used to play.
They were very much Castle Coliseum like, intimate, small, and loud. And then they move into these big new arenas so they can have concerts and sell more tickets. And I don't think they've won quite as many games, and they haven't had as much success. I think for what helps you win basketball games, what is really important, Castle's top 3 in the ACC, thereabouts.
I think the Dean Dome's a little overrated.
As far as
Sleepy
noise,
fans, yeah.
they don't make much noise.
Yeah,
don't
that's
they?
what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fairly. I mean, I haven't been in the Dean Dome, but
Okay.
just seeing pictures of it, it looks 22,000, I think.
Yeah, it's big. It's and it's very nice, but they're quiet. They're I was there for and it wasn't that the crowd wasn't big, students in full effect. It just wasn't very loud in there.
You know, when you won that many national championships and ACC championships, I get it.
Well,
it's
the nature of the fan base. You remember the UNC fan on Twitter who was like, "I'll never go back to a Virginia Tech game. They make too much noise when we have the ball." And
and then football.
yeah.
I still think that was made up. But
I don't think
it's
the
fun.
original one was made up. I think that was real. There was another one that came out this past for the basketball game this past year.
I think they were rerunning the football one after the basketball game.
Bringing up that UNC game from last year, and I just had a vision in my head of everyone storming the field. I'm so glad that the students did not storm the court last
Apparently,
night. Apparently,
ESPN was prepared for it with their coverage.
They
of it.
always line up the security guards like every single game, like they're gonna do it. But
I think you have to do that by law.
Yeah.
But
I'm glad they did.
I think the days of storming the court in Castle are over. Thank
Well,
goodness.
Duke wasn't even ranked.
and it's the
that's the
first
thing.
time.
That's what I mean, but that wouldn't be the first time Tech students stormed a court when they shouldn't have. There have been times in the past where you're like, look, it's not an upset to beat UVA or to beat Duke.
Wait,
and
how
you
do
see
you
them on
storm the court at Castle?
Anyway,
You have to jump over that wall.
very slowly.
And usually
Very
someone breaks
slowly.
their ankle.
I was
Yeah,
gonna say
it
that
does
sounds like a great way to get hurt.
Almost always someone breaks their ankle.
Yeah, absolutely. I stormed it once when I was a student when we beat Duke, but I wasn't. My seats were not behind. I was in the wraparound section,
Right.
Like in the very far, I guess, left-hand part.
Yeah,
of the
if you
student
break your
section.
ankle there, you're just a klutz.
You're just a klutz.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was no reason to storm the court. Virginia Tech was favored. They almost always beat Duke and Castle. The other, Tech is the ACC champs. Like, we shouldn't feel like, and I know it feels weird to say when you're 2-7, but we shouldn't feel like it's an upset to beat.
So I tell you,
Teams like
so
that.
you're talking about the maturation of a fan base, and I'll also say this: when Tech first got into the ACC, any game against UNC or Duke featured, I'm not exaggerating, 15 to 2,500 fans of UNC or
Sometimes
Duke.
more.
True.
And like, how many Duke fans were there last night?
that many.
Not that many. So that's happened gradually over time that Tech fans have used their tickets more and more.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I'll say this: this could be part of some of Tech's issues this year. Obviously, losing Couture hurts, and me not eating a cheeseburger before those 7 games was critical. But
Not necessarily in that order.
but you're viewed a little differently by other teams when you win the ACC title. So when Clemson plays Virginia Tech, you're not just playing little old Virginia Tech with their Wofford players, right? Playing the freaking ACC champs.
You're a team that's never won the tournament, by the way, if you're Clemson.
Right. We're going to get everybody's best shot. So there could be a little bit of that. It's like, we've never been champions before in
Why
basketball.
Boston College won?
Well, yeah, I'm serious. It's like it's a different mental adjustment you have to make after you've won a title as opposed to before you win your first one as a player, because other players, other teams, other coaches, they're all going to view you differently now that you've won one. So that could be a mental hurdle that Virginia Tech has maybe struggled to get over a little bit.
Solid point that nobody's talking about.
Something that was a non-factor last night was you couldn't say that Duke was hungry to get after Tech once again after losing the ACC championship because one guy was on their
one
roster
guy.
that actually played, and it was Jeremy Roach. They had one other guy that came in at the end in garbage time. He played 30 seconds in the ACC title game.
And Couture did a great job on Roach last night.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, Roach was not a factor.
Anything else from you, Katie?
Nope.
That's it. All right, that wraps things up as far as talking Virginia Tech men's basketball. Unless anyone has any final
David's
comments.
going to join you for the second half of the show. I'm going to go to the gym and work off all my cheeseburgers.
Perfect. We're going to talk ACC women's basketball, and we're going to talk Hokies wrestling coming up next. We'll take a short break. TSL podcast on a Tuesday. Welcome back, everybody. Thanks so much for being with us. It's the TSL podcast. A little bit of a shift in the set here today. David Cunningham joins us for the second half. We're going to talk women's basketball and wrestling. Will Stewart's still on set. Katie Adams still behind the scenes, and Nick Brown is producing. I'm Giovanni Heater. All right, Will, first I want to ask you about your fancy schmancy seats over at Castle for that highest capacity wrestling match.
No, I didn't.
They weren't
sit
fancy.
in really close, affordable seats that anybody can buy. That didn't happen. So I was looking at the wrestling. First of all, nobody here is wearing orange and maroon or any Tech brand or TSL brand. That's unusual. So
Are we in trouble?
that's neither good nor bad. It just struck me. So I was looking at the Wrestling Insider email that comes from the Southeast Regional Training Center. And I usually skim those, and I noticed this thing at the bottom. They're like, hey, get mat side seats. And I thought, oh, okay, I'll do that. I bet that's like $100, but I'll do it. And I clicked on it, and they were $20 each. And I said, are you kidding me?
Wow.
I'm totally doing that. So I bought a couple tickets and figured out later, found Clark Rulin. Clark went with me. I asked Freyer and Roby later if that was a thing they did every match, and I just missed it. And they said it's the first time since pre-COVID that they did it.
Really?
So they only sold about, 16 or 17 of them. There were 2 rows of chairs, mat side. Clark and I were sitting in the second row, and there were 2 empty seats next to us. And that was, it was awesome. So this is an odd tangent, and don't laugh at me, but I've been listening to a podcast about the history of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, which is way more interesting than you would think.
Okay.
And it's just audio, folks. I'm not looking at anything. I'm just hearing the story. But one of the things with the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders, they paid those women nothing, like $15 a game, and they were asked to be all over the place and do everything. And the woman who did the podcast, Gio can't stop laughing.
Because Nick's laughing back there. When Nick and I start laughing, it's bad.
The woman who did the podcast said she had talked with dozens of former Cowboy cheerleaders, and they all said, at least half of them said the same thing: I would have done it for free, because being out on the field and the noise and the energy. Now, I'm not comparing Castle during a wrestling match to, Texas Stadium, but when you are down on the floor, like when the cheerleaders run by, the floor vibrates. When the high techs are behind you dancing, the floor is going boom, boom, boom. And when a 197-pound class wrestler picks the other guy up and throws him to the mat, the whole floor vibrates. And then, of course, you get it was almost 6,000 people, and you get that whole thing coming down. So it was a really cool experience to see everything just up close and feel all that energy. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Don't do it though, people. Just don't buy the tickets. I don't want them to sell out.
Right.
I want to be able to do that.
That's what it was, because you said that they only sold 17, but it looked like all the seats were full down there. Was the other side parents, or what was that?
There was something. I don't know what was going on the other side. I saw some NC State people over there.
Okay.
So you're right. They probably sold some over on that other side, but that was NC State's side. Like, who wants to sit over there?
Right.
Clark and I walked onto the floor, and I'm like, which end should we sit in? Stupid. And Clark's like, that one down there, because that's where the Tech bench was.
Right.
But yeah, there were 2 empty seats next to us, and down on the other end, I guess there were a few people there.
Do you know if they'll do it going forward? Was this a once-a-year thing?
I didn't ask that, but I'll definitely be looking for the email, because they wrestle at home against Pitt this Friday.
Right. Interesting. All right, well, let's break down this big win. I mean, you had some upsets in there. You had guys deliver that you thought would deliver. Mekhi Lewis had a great match. Bryce Andonian did his thing, but a couple of big upsets as well.
Yeah. Go ahead, Dave.
Bryce Andonian was the first storyline of the night.
Yeah.
He hadn't wrestled in a duel all year, comes out and gets a major. And in the fashion he did, it was like first 15 seconds of the match, takedown.
It was unreal.
And got more points to it. And it was right off the bat, Virginia Tech was underway. And I mean, it had been back and forth, but Andonian set the tone immediately. And it was basically Andonian was in control. He almost got a Tech fall,
Right.
Which would have been 5 team points instead of 4. But Andonian was in control for that entire match.
he was ranked 6th in the country, and he was wrestling an NC State ranked wrestler who's ranked 7th. Does that sound right?
Correct. That is.
They
exact.
were 1 apart, and Andonian won it 24-10. And you're right, that's 1 point away from so you get three team points if you beat your guy.
Mm-hmm.
If you get a major decision by 8 or more points, you get 8 to 14. You get 4 points.
Mm-hmm.
If you win by 15 points without pinning the guy, it's called a tech fall, and you get 5 points. If you pin a guy, it's called a fall, and you get 6 points. So that's how it works. And Andonian has a reputation for being a wild, unconventional wrestler.
You don't really know what to expect.
And so he's in the 157-pound weight class. Does that sound right? I think so.
Gio should have the results in front of them.
He is 157.
Yeah.
Correct.
So at that point, and here's where I want to go on for a while because I had all these thoughts while we're watching this. The NC State Virginia Tech wrestling rivalry is one of the underrated rivalries in the ACC across all sports. I believe I read the last 10 years that the regular season championship and tournament championships been won by one of those two schools. And they don't like each other. It's not a gentleman's rivalry, at least when I talk to Tech fans. I can't speak for Tony Roby and all those people.
Yeah, well, the coaches don't like each other.
Okay, well, there you go. They don't. And so I found myself to phrase it the way I used to think about it is I hate the way NC State wrestles. They're very defensive. They don't take many shots. They just play defense. And it's super annoying to watch. And then I had two thoughts. Number one, that's pretty much how Mekhi Lewis wrestles.
Yes, it is.
Mekhi is very much, he doesn't take many shots. He plays defense. He waits for you to shoot him. And then he's so quick that he counterattacks and beats you. And that's basically how he won the national championship, is wrestling like that, playing to his strengths. Mm-hmm. And then the other thought I had was you just described how Frank Beamer coached football. Play defense, keep it close, win at the end. And the problem in air quotes is that the entire NC State team wrestles like that. They wait for you to do something. They wait for you to make a mistake, and they're coached to be very good on top. So if they get you down, they stay there. It's
well, and how many? 4 matches went into overtime, and NC State won all of them.
So that's the next thing is I got to look at Damian Salas's stat sheet that he keeps afterwards. And this thing ended up 16-14 Virginia Tech, but it really felt to me like Virginia Tech was the much better
it
team.
Probably should have been. It could have been 22-8.
Yeah,
I mean, that's if Tech wins 2 of the overtime matches. There were
Right.
4
They
matches.
lost every sudden
4
victory.
matches that went to overtime.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, it was a Tech guy going after him. NC State being defensive, making a move, boom, done.
And
I mean,
it's
that like I think Hunter Boland's match was the exact way.
Yep.
And
So let's drill down into that a little bit further. The other thing I saw on Damian's sheet was that Virginia Tech had 13 takedowns in the 10 weight classes, and NC State had 6. NC State won 4 of the weight classes in sudden victory. That's 4 of their takedowns. So the rest of the evening, NC State had 2 takedowns to 13 for Virginia Tech. So that's what you get. It's very frustrating to wrestle them because they wait on you, and they're really good at defense, and they're really good at getting you down and keeping you down. So to kind of put a bow on all this, it's just a great rivalry. 6,000 people there going crazy. It's growing over the years.
I sat with a couple of NC State fans right in front of me and chatted back and forth with them, but neither one of you guys mentioned yet Andy Smith, ranked number 26.
Well, that's because we started with Andoni.
That's true. That's true. That's true. That is probably the next really, really big win for Tech. Upsets number 6, Isaac Trumbull. I mean, just huge. That was pretty much the game winner.
It's
match winner.
Andy Smith
Dual winner.
Andy Smith is good. He's like 25th, 26th in the country. But Trumbull's number 6 in the country. And Smith is a Christiansburg kid. And he's doing it in Castle Coliseum in front of 6,000 people. And he comes out and just fights his way, guts out a way to win. That was impressive. And it looked like, and Will, you took a great video. It's on Tech Sideline's Twitter account. Of the end, it looked like Trumbull was going to get him. and Smith stood him up and found a way, and that sealed the match. Tech doesn't win. Smith doesn't win that match, and Virginia Tech does not win.
Yeah.
And Smith found a way to win, and upset the number 6 kid in the number 6 kid in the country in the process. And Castle Coliseum lost its mind.
Yeah, and they're if I'm correct, they're both the same age. I think they're both redshirt sophomores. So as long as they stay where they are, they're going to see each other a lot. And it was at that point, that was the next to last weight class.
197.
NC State was heavily favored in that one. If they'd won that one, then it was going to come down to the last weight class, which NC State did wind up winning. So that effectively sealed it. That made it 16-11, which means in the heavyweight class, NC State would have needed a tech fall, which wasn't. Tech falls just don't happen in the heavyweight weight class with guys that are evenly matched.
Well, tech falls don't happen much, period. But yes,
Yeah,
especially
right.
in heavyweight.
Usually, if you're good enough to tech fall a guy, you're going to pin him. You're going to just outright pin him.
Well, but usually, Andonian needed one more point and would have tech falled the guy.
Yeah.
But in heavyweight, it's
it's
basically back and forth,
watching
back and
two
forth.
guys lean on each other for 7 minutes.
But after the 7th match, which I believe was Mackay, there were 3 matches left, and NC State was favored in every one.
Yeah.
And if it had played out like that, NC State would have won.
They would have won. That's right.
And Andy Smith comes up like upset of his life.
So far, yes.
To this point in his career. I mean, biggest match win. And that match, him winning that, won Tech the duel, which puts Tech in the driver's seat for the ACC regular season title. And, of course, Tech has Pitt on Friday night in Castle Coliseum this week. You get past Pitt and you're winning the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, the Tech-Pitt rivalry in wrestling is a pretty good one, too. But, yeah, Tech-NC State is a premier one.
Final thoughts on wrestling before we move to women's hoops?
Just go back to what I said earlier. I really think Tech was the better team than NC State, markedly so. Credit to NC State for winning the 4 sudden victories and making it close. But that's the first time I've watched Tech and NC State and really thought that Tech was that much better. Of course, NC State was missing somebody. They were missing, I think, Camacho at 125 pounds, I think.
Yeah, which he would have gone up against
Ventresca.
Yeah, Tech's freshman, who I believe NC State won that match anyway.
Yeah. That's true. They did.
So yeah, I mean, I think it was a little bit eye opening. I thought Jack Brisendine's story afterwards was phenomenal.
Jack is an awesome. He knows wrestling, and he's also an awesome writer.
Yeah.
So this ended up with each team winning 5 weight classes, which ordinarily is 15-15. You had Andonians made their decision, which added a point.
And
one of the Pitt wrestlers,
NC State.
Excuse me, NC State. Sorry, did a no. It's in the rule book. When you either in anger or celebratory, don't throw your headgear.
Right.
He won. He got excited, took off his headgear, and threw it, and they deducted.
I thought it was more like
point.
he threw it up.
No, he threw it straight up to the bench because the coach caught it. It was right in front of him.
Oh,
and immediately got a team.
He threw it, and Tech Roby was on it.
Yeah.
Immediately, like, hey.
Well, it's an easy call for the
well,
refs.
and the officials were like, that's weird, because they hadn't even shaken hands yet.
Yeah,
like they hadn't even shaken hands and said this guy's the winner, and so they were like, all right, this guy's the winner, -1 team point.
-1 team point.
And again, in a match where, as Jack wrote in his recap, Roby was not really pleased with the 4 overtime matches and the way Tech lost them.
Yeah.
Like, Tech wins, again, 1 or 2 of them. It's a completely different match. That's something Roby said he wants his team to improve on. But Tech won despite that, which kind of goes to show, like, Tech might have a big leg up on NC State this year. I mean, you got to think a lot of these guys are going to face off again when the ACC championships roll around. But I think it was really impressive how, a lot of the Tech guys did their job and won. And then Andy Smith came up with a big one. Andonian was electric. Mackay did his thing as usual. Latona was really fun to watch.
Always.
There are a lot of those wrestlers that are just great personalities. And I think a lot of those, like, it could have been like 22-8 had Tech actually, like, completely handled its business. But a win is a win.
So I'll say what I always say: even if you don't know anything about wrestling, go.
Go.
Number one, it's still free.
Yeah.
Number two, you'll figure it out pretty quick. And wrestling people love to talk about wrestling, so just listen. If you go and you don't know wrestling, listen to the people around you.
It's a very
and ask them
it's a
questions.
very friendly environment.
Yeah, ask them
like
questions
everybody.
like what's riding time, and they'll tell you.
So I sat with Evan Hughes, who of course
Who
is
used to call wrestling?
not used to,
Still does?
Still does. He called the Missouri match earlier this year.
You're right, because his job as women's basketball radio is technically a part-time job. They allow him to do ACC network.
Yeah.
stuff.
Oh yeah. So I mean, Evan, Zach Mackey calls some stuff. Evan called the Missouri match this year, and of course now a lot of the matches are on the ACC network. So I forget who they had on call, but Rock Harrison was the analyst. He does a phenomenal job. But I was sitting with Evan, and there were multiple people sitting around us. Evan spent much of the match kind of giving a little play-by-play of what was going on and explaining the rules as we went. And okay, yeah, Evan, why did that happen? And Evan's like, well, I don't think it was a takedown because he didn't have full control or whatnot. And there was a couple times where he was like, usually Ty Walls is usually his analyst, and he was like, that's why, I usually just rely on Ty. Ty Walls kind of helps me out and clarifies everything. But to your point, that was a really great crowd. A ton of Corps cadets there.
Yeah.
Right.
It was a fun crowd. The wrestling matches are really, really fun.
There was a student section, not cadets, right behind the NC State bench, which is where I was. Not with the student section, but like a little bit to the right of them. And they were pretty rowdy. I mean, the stuff they were yelling at the NC State guys the entire night was pretty ruthless. So.
It's fun, man.
That's the club wrestling.
That's the club. Okay.
Oh, so Nick says it's the club wrestling team. That's
Okay.
great.
Yeah. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I went with my roommate Chris. His brother wrestled at Purdue. And
Chris Irons, his brother?
No, different Chris.
Different Chris.
You wouldn't know him. But he wrestled and he's from North Jersey, which wrestling's huge, and his brother wrestled at Purdue. So it was good to be with somebody that could explain everything. And man, was he into it. So yeah, it was a good time.
There was an article I read a few years ago called The Saddest Place on Earth, and it may have been situated in Jersey. Okay. It was a high school wrestling tournament where a reporter stood in the tunnel where the losers come out.
Oh.
And wrote a story about these high school kids coming out. They've just lost a championship, and it's no real point to that story.
Right.
It's just this guy had never realized. See, the thing about wrestling, and I always say this, is there are zero excuses in wrestling. You can sometimes blame something on a ref if you want to, because maybe you thought you had a takedown or something like that and he didn't call it. But for the most part, it's that other guy beating your butt.
But that's why challenges exist.
Yeah, right. And so, but it's one-on-one, and you can't blame it because your teammate, like last night, Mutz made a great pass to Bazili, and Bazili didn't score the layup. Mutz loses an assist because of that. Wrestling's nothing like that. You're either winning or you're losing. That guy across from you is either losing to you or beating your butt, and
right.
So I had a son that wrestled, and he got very angry and frustrated when he lost because he knew he couldn't look anywhere else.
Right. Interesting. Virginia Tech women's basketball continues their success. They now move on 16-3 on the season. They take down Wake Forest. That was on, Sunday in the Castle. Pretty good crowd in Castle. Nice little student section in the Castle Guard. It got loud in there at points. Kitley does her thing. A 74-57 win. Hokies looked good.
So games are becoming a lot more difficult. Well, games have become a lot more difficult for Virginia Tech because teams are playing zone.
Right.
Opponents are only coming out in 2-3 zones now. And that's because Elizabeth Kitley is so good. And, the fact that she still put up the stat line she did when, she's facing a zone is very impressive. Ashley Owusu's finally back. Virginia Tech is starting to put its pieces together. I don't think Tech's scraped the ceiling of what it can do. I do think it's still trying to figure out the zone because every single team has pretty much played zone since Notre Dame did a little bit of it back in December. But that was a big win. It was closer than a lot of, closer than the box score indicated.
Correct.
It was a 3-point game at the end of the third quarter. And Wake Forest made a big run after, ironically, Kenny Brooks got a technical foul, only his second of his Tech career, which doesn't happen often. And that kind of fired up Wake Forest a little bit. And Wake made a run, and then Tech outscored them by 15, 16 points in that fourth quarter and pulled away. And I thought it was a really good team effort. Hokies did a good job kind of holding off Wake. Wake made its runs. Tech kind of just stood back and said, okay, we'll play good defense, stand you up, and kind of push right back. And Hokies got the job done.
Yep. Wake Forest actually outscored Virginia Tech 30-18 in the third quarter, like you mentioned, David, and then Tech was able to bite back at that 21-7. They outscored Wake Forest in the fourth quarter to seal the deal. Huge one coming up, though, for the women on Thursday on the road at Duke. That's an interesting matchup. Some people say Duke might be a little bit overrated. Regardless, though, a top 25 team doesn't get much tougher than that.
I'm going down for that. I'll be in Cameron Indoor Stadium for that. It should be a good one. Top 16 matchup, 12 versus 16. Duke's really good. And this is a little bit of a rivalry, too. Not as much as Virginia Tech and NC State women's basketball, because that is a heck of a rivalry. And, of course, those two teams haven't even played this year.
Right. They always save it for the end. They play each other twice within like a week and a half stretch at the end.
Yeah. Virginia Tech and Duke has become, especially since Carol Lawson took over, Virginia Tech and Duke has become a pretty big rivalry on the women's basketball side. Duke is good, and Tech has been okay on the road, not fantastic. Saw them lose to Clemson, saw them lose to Miami. Had to gut one out against Pitt. It's gonna be close. It's gonna be a toss-up. The fact that Ashley Owusu's back, that helps out everything. It kind of smooths out the rotation a little bit for Kenny Brooks. I'm excited. It's gonna be a really good one. Hokies are gonna have their hands full, and that Duke team might be marginally overrated, but not by much. I mean, that's one of the best teams in the ACC.
No doubt about it. Will, anything on women's basketball from you?
I am looking up some here. You're talking about the Tech-Duke rivalry, and I'm trying to find it on my phone. And this goes back to, and unfortunately, I don't think the details here, but, Tech made the Sweet 16 in 98, 99. Tech went to the NCAA tournament in 97, 98 under Bonnie Hendrickson. And they beat Florida in the first round and then lost in the second round. And the Hokies next year started out, I don't want to sit here and scroll on my phone in the middle of the podcast. They started out something like 23-0 the next year, some crazy number of wins. And they served notice in the second game of the year when they went, let's see if it was at Duke. Yeah, it was at Duke. The second game of the year, they went down to Duke and beat Duke at Duke. And Duke was like a top 5 team at that point in time. So you're right, it goes way back. And this was back when Tech was in the Atlantic 10, and Duke actually hosted and probably regretted it, so it goes way back. So looking forward to it. We're big spenders here, so we're sending David down there to cover it.
Hey, there we go. All right. Anything else from Katie over in the fourth chair today?
You didn't even mention the accolades that Liz Kitley got
That's
and George
true.
Amor got in that Wake Forest game. Liz Kitley, let's see, I wrote it down. Now set the program record for most field goals made with 695. She was also named ACC Player of the Week. Also, just an hour ago, I saw on Twitter that she is a contender for Defensive Player of the Year, so that's huge. And then George Amor now holds the program record for assists made in ACC games. So, of course, love that contribution from them. I know last week we talked a lot about Deasia Gregg. I wanted to mention Taylor Soule has just been incredible. And one thing that I noticed from her after the game is not only did she, stick around and take pictures with every single fan that asked for a picture with her, but she went and created a line and gave a high five to every single member of the Spirit Squad that cheered for her and just thanked them for their support throughout the season, which I thought was really nice. So just wanted to mention that.
Was Taylor the one that Kenny Brooks said had a ton of personality?
Yeah.
Was he's talking about Taylor?
Yeah. She would be the equivalent of Justin.
I was just going to say she's like
except
Mons.
as Kenny would say, she is probably more energetic than Justin Mutz.
That's saying something.
Yeah.
So to bring the story back around, Liz Kitley broke the record of Terry Williams, who was the star player for that Virginia Tech team that I mentioned.
Interesting.
Terry was once a mainstay on the Virginia Tech, the Tech Sideline, Hokie Central back then, homepage. I had figured out a way to embed images behind the text, and I had Roland Roberts on one side and Terry Williams on the other. So, speaks to me.
One more thing. I know we mentioned Olivia Miles last week, who had been a complimentary piece to Dara Mabry, who I'm sure you guys saw from this past week, tore her ACL against UVA and will not finish out her career. So it's disappointing that if the Hokies and Fighting Irish match up again in the ACC tournament, she won't be a part of that team because, I mean, we would want to beat Notre Dame with a former Hokie playing against them. So that's disappointing. But also big news coming out of Notre Dame this week was that Mike Bray is retiring. So lots of changes within that program.
He's probably my favorite coach in the ACC to talk to.
I was going to say, he's probably out of Southside of Virginia coaches. He's my favorite, I think.
Right. Steve Forbes is up there and Jim Larinaga is too, but Mike Bray is
no love for Boeheim.
He's fantastic. Do you have love? I mean,
no, he's a grouch. No, it was a joke.
So one day David was on the coaches. David was on the ACC
like a week or
coaches
two
call,
ago.
and I was sitting there in the office while David listened to the call. And Davis was just, when Boeheim was on, David was just laughing and shaking his head.
Yeah, because somebody asks him like, "Hey, what did you think about the way you guys, what did you like about what you?" about how you guys played in your 2 or 3 wins. And he was like, nothing. We didn't play well. And it's like,
he's a grump.
No, he's like ruthless too, because he'll be mean, straight up mean. And my favorite thing, me and my dad will sit there and we'll laugh, and I'm probably gonna not get a job for these things, but he'll get up there and he does this thing where he just does this weird thing with his mouth, and it's
That's
so
part of your
funny.
imitation, part of your Boeheim imitation.
And he's just so grumpy, and I would be terrified to be in that media room. Yeah.
Well, but back to Bray, he's the only Boeheim's the only coach that's been tenured longer out of the ACC coaches. I mean, Boeheim's been obviously for probably
90 years,
probably since I don't know, 980. Mike Bray was here since 2000, and Leonard Hamilton is right around the early 2000s, but then you start getting into the area of, Mike Young is Mike Young, and I mean Tony Bennett's been there a while, but
long time.
There are a bunch of coaches that have, Mike Young is kind of in the older upper echelon class of the ACC. Soon he will be once Larinaga and Hamilton and Boeheim retire. But Mike Bray is an awesome guy, and with the media, he's so open, so welcoming. He's a DeMatha guy. He's from Maryland. I was chatting with David Teal last night, and on the Zoom call yesterday, Mike Bray referenced a play in Duke's 84, because he was assistant on Coach K's staff. He's on Duke's 84 NCAA tournament game, some play that Jeff Capel made in a game in Knoxville in one of the NCAA tournament games in the 80s or 90s. Maybe it was 94. And Bray just pulled it out of memory, just recited, and he was so open, such a classy guy. I'm really gonna miss him.
I've always thought he was a great coach. Just watching his teams and how they play.
He was innovative.
Yeah, and also you get a good feel for a coach watching his players. And I can't think of a Notre Dame player that I've disliked during Bray's tenure there. Maybe I'm just forgetting somebody, but they've had guys rotate through there in the last 10, 15 years. I love that guy to play for Tech. Man, I wish that guy played for Tech. Man, I wish that guy.
They're always
played for
big.
Tech.
They always rebound the ball well. They've got some white guys that can shoot the 3 ball that frustrate the heck out of you. But they're fundamentally sound.
They had a guy 8 years ago who was a really good basketball player and was also a good baseball pitcher. I can't remember his name. But they're just a really well coached team, and he was always very gracious in his comments, and so was Coach K. He'd make gracious comments after the game, but I never cared much for Coach K outside of when I thought he was saying the right things for a reason. I think Bray, that's just the way Bray is. He's a what you see is what you get. He's not putting on a front.
I never really knew him personally, but there's a kid from Syracuse, played locally. We called his games in high school, that now plays for Notre Dame. He left, went to a big prep school, plays for Notre Dame. And I just wonder how if Bray knew he was going to leave, how that recruiting process goes, because now he's a freshman. He was a high 4-star, but I don't know that he'll go to the NBA this year. And it's like, how do you tell a kid like, hey, I might be leaving?
Yeah.
Or maybe Bray didn't know and had like a moment, or time with his family. Where he's like, I think this is it.
It's also Notre Dame, and they're going to bring in a really good coach.
True.
I guess, Bray was a really good fit for them. There was a time where people thought that Bray would take over for Kay.
Yeah.
And then Bray went to Notre Dame and Kay just kept coaching, and that kind of fell by the wayside. So it'll be interesting to see what Notre Dame does. I don't know if Notre Dame's going to be locked into an our guy thing like Duke wound up being.
I don't think they have one.
No,
necessarily.
I mean,
Who's that gonna be?
you can go and find a ton of different, people that are discussing who's going to replace Bray. But I mean, it's Notre Dame. It's the brand speaks for itself. If I was Notre Dame, I'd go take the best coach I could get.
He's got to fit Notre Dame though.
Correct. Well, yes, the best coach that fits Notre Dame. But
The weird thing was I didn't think Brian Kelly was that guy for football, but yet he went there and did well.
family.
Oh, geez. All right, let's not get down that rabbit hole. Thanks so much for being with us today. Anything else from any of you guys?
No, what time?
What's
is
coming
it?
up on TSL this week?
I don't know. The managing editor's sitting right there.
There's not a ton. I've still got to figure out what I'm going to write this week. I'm going to be down doing women's basketball stuff on Thursday.
Yeah.
But the men don't play again until Saturday. It's not
Shake Jack's tree and get him to write a preview of
he is.
wrestling. Okay.
And he wrote one for last week.
Yep.
So Jack's gonna write a wrestling preview. Chris will have some stuff coming up. There's not much football stuff to talk about right now. So that's kind of it. I mean, we're getting close to baseball and softball season though.
Softball, by the way, preseason ranked number 11.
Yeah.
Nick says softball's preseason ranked number 11.
Yeah.
And baseball is 13th, I believe.
Baseball's both are in the top 25. We're gonna have a lot of good stuff coming in really soon.
Absolutely. All right, hang tight. Big week coming up as the women play on the road at Duke on Thursday. The men are back in action inside Castle against Syracuse on Saturday. Wrestling's got a Friday night duel against Pitt. A lot of exciting stuff coming on in Virginia Tech athletics. We'll have it all covered right here at Tech Sideline. Thanks so much to our sponsors today, First Bank and Trust Company, as well as Triumph NIL, and we will.
And the Hokie Way.
And the Hokie Way. We'll see you next time.